So, Bob, in Vietnam, you didn't have to kill any innocent women or kids, did you?
Well, they're all guilty, PJ.
Back is the motherfucking rock god.
That is dark. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Bob. Am I going to say you're my father-in-law?
What was that?
Are we going to say you're my father-in-law?
You can if you want.
I'm here with Bob. He's given up his time today. He's in Vietnam. Let me quickly tell you about Bob, the guest on today's show. I usually do a big thing about who we're talking to, but I'm just going to keep it real short because I just want to get into Vietnam, and that's going to be a great conversation. But Bob is actually my father-in-law, and I've known him for a very long time, and he's something about Bob I really love. He's got the highest IQ of any individual I've known. When I was young, remember when we used to watch Sale of the Century, and he used to get every question. Fuck, I couldn't. You can't fathom it, right? And his daughters and sons are very, very intelligent people, and I've met them all. And actually, his daughters went on that show, Family Feud.
No, I think it was Pointless and The Chase they were on.
And they
won.
They won. It wasn't fair. They just kicked us. But Bob is a Vietnam veteran, cartoonist for the newspapers. I'm not going to get real into. I don't want people looking things up, and because I've got a lot of haters out there. But Bob was a cartoonist, politically based cartoons for your newspapers. Remember those cartoons, the funny caricatures of Paul Keating? Oh, is that Bob Hawke?
Yeah, I guess so.
Bob Hawke, all those sort of guys, and all your ministers. They were his. You used to see them in the papers. He's also a musician, an artist. He's my father-in-law. And Bob, after the military, he ran a very high a government sector, and he was right in charge at the top of running New South Wales and Queensland. And we're not going to name who it was. I don't want to get into all that, but it wasn't the police. Put it this way: if I want someone to disappear, we could still do that, couldn't we?
No, you can leave the exaggerations to me, PJ.
No, I'm not exaggerating. Highly respected man, and I just love how smart he is. And we've got a great conversation so we're just going to get straight into it. So Bob was in the Vietnam War. Just straight into it. Do you want to quickly tell them about how the situation, what was going on in the world at the time, just in short, why the Vietnam War was happening?
Yeah, well, I came into the army basically as what you could call an economic conscript, because at 18 years of age, dropped out of school, had a girlfriend in a situation, got married, all in the same year, left school, got married, became a father at 18, in the middle of what was known then as a credit squeeze, and there was no work. I moved to Queensland to try and get work, couldn't get any, and so for pretty much economic reasons, I ended up in the army. And the army at the time was in a pretty bad shape in my experience, because we had no money for training, but we sort of knew there was something going on up in Southeast Asia, and the Americans were getting involved in what became known as the Vietnam War, or the American Vietnam War. And a quick background onto how that came about.
Please.
After World War II, the French, who had Vietnam as a colony, tried to re-establish themselves as basically the colonists of Vietnam, and a very strong opposition, particularly from the north, of people who wanted to reunite the country or get rid of colonial control, fought the French, and they beat them. In 1954, they had a major battle, and the French were thrown out. And then a lot of people from the north went down south into Vietnam, and there was a resolution, a United Nations resolution, to put a line across the country. So you had the the communist part was to the north,
Yep.
and what was known as the democratic part was to the south.
Yep.
And then you had an insurgency of people trying to overthrow the government in South Vietnam on behalf of unifying the country. And that was known at the time as the National Liberation Front. They were basically a pretty strong guerrilla outfit, and they were growing in strength. So the Americans put a lot of advisors into the country. Back in the early 60s, Australia contributed a few advisors, but we sort of knew that we'd probably get involved at a higher level. And when the Americans decided to upgrade the amount of people they were putting in there, the government of the day, the Menzies, Bob Menzies was the Prime Minister, and old Bob, he spent half his time sucking up to the Brits and the other half of the time sucking up to the Americans. So when the Americans wanted an Australian flag, an Australian commitment there, the battalion that I'd gone to after joining the army was the only battalion really up to anywhere near strength. So there was a decision made to put those over there into Vietnam. And because we'd had no real structure to do the job, they amalgamated my battalion, and the battalion was about 1,000 men roughly, with 4 rifle companies of 100 men each, plus some support. And so they amalgamated us with an American Airborne Brigade. It was the 173rd Airborne, and it was stationed around a major airport north of Saigon called Benoit. And we moved in and formed part of the protection barrier around that airport. The Americans and the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, also had a job of protecting that airport because it had been under pretty heavy mortar fire from the National Liberation Front, which by then was known as the Viet Cong.
You said just little weird things interest me. You know, they put the line through Vietnam.
Yep.
Who separate the North? Who does that?
It was, as far as I understand it, PJ, it was an agreement by all sides at the time, which was endorsed by the United Nations.
Yep.
And it was to only be a temporary barrier, and there was to be elections to be held after a couple of years. But the Americans particularly weren't real keen on an election because it looked like the communist leader, old Ho Chi Minh, would have won the election. And because we were in the middle of what was known as the Cold War at the time, that is the struggle between the Western alliance led by the Americans and the Soviet Union and China. China had just become communist. The Soviet Union, of course, was communist, and it looked to the big planners that there was going to be a spreading of communism all the way down through the Malay Peninsula to almost down to Australia. So that was the basic. They called it the domino theory, the Americans. I think that Eisenhower was the president, and he called it the domino theory. And we were all regular soldiers at the time. National service hadn't been introduced when we went to Vietnam. So we were all regular army.
Before the conversation, he sent me sort of like a manuscript of notes so I could get my bearings around it. You just got written here, I suppose I better say a thing or two about Australia's defence posture before we get down to the shooting match. In a nutshell, Australia is pretty much has and always been willing, even grateful victim of a protection racket. You know the routine? Nice little country you have there. Shame if something bad happened to it. Now here's a few little chores you can do for us. This is how it is, with Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, Australia's a huge landmass with a small population, and we've never conducted any military stuff other than joining up with one of the big powers. And up until the fall of Singapore in 1942, we were part of the British Empire, right?
Yep.
And so anything we did militarily was in conjunction with the Brits. After the fall of Singapore, when the Japanese defeated the British at Singapore and took in half our army, basically, into captivity, we had to turn to somebody else. And so the Brits were basically out of the game in Asia to our north, and the Americans were the obvious choice. And so we went from being being under basically a protection racket by the Brits to going under a protection racket from the Americans.
Yeah.
And of course, the Americans defeated the Japanese in the Pacific, probably by 1944. It was all over, but they finished it off with as I say, an exclamation point of dropping a couple of atomic bombs on Japan, which was for other reasons, but also to tell the Russians, who were quite interested in what was going on, this is our territory, right? And so since then, every little engagement the Australians have had, the Australian military, has been basically with the Americans. Korea, particularly, as a major commitment we had with the Americans and the United Nations, and then followed by Vietnam. They were the two major things we had. Since then, of course, you'd be, in your time, you've seen Afghanistan and so forth, always with the Americans.
Because we're really covering a massive scope, and I'll tell you, Bob could talk you through all the battles, all the world wars, down to the nitty gritty, because that's he's got that crazy.
Crazy is the right word, yeah.
He's got that crazy memory. Let's go back to you. You couldn't find work. You had a girl with a situation, and you enlisted into the army.
Yeah.
Did you get in first? Did you get in first go?
Yeah, well, in those days it was pretty easy to get into the army, and there's
Now it's a nightmare.
it's a bit of a nightmare these days. I think you've got to be, very up on high tech these days. I mean, the way the army was in 1963 was not a lot different, I guess, from World War II. I mean, our equipment was ancient. I mean, the personal webbing we had was called 37 pattern, so work out when that was first introduced, 1937. And we were carrying, World War II weapons, Owen guns and that sort of thing. And
people didn't know that. Australia
very
Force,
primitive.
and we're going to talk about it, but when you were in Vietnam, and the Americans had all the hot shit, eh?
Absolutely,
And you were rocking up. Is it true that you were in there with cargo pants?
We're in there with basically the same green type uniforms that they were wearing on the Kokoda Trail, and the same boots and gaiters, tropical studded big leather boots, ammunition boots, and we had radios that didn't work and all sorts of stuff like that.
We'll get into that. So you got in, to get in the Defence Force. I tried to get in the army. I didn't get in because I had acne. And my kidney only works 98%. That's just madness.
Oh, yeah. So
you got in first go. Let's go.
Yeah, well, when you joined then, and I guess it's probably much similar now, you went to recruit training at Kapooka, which was again configured like it was in World War II, old Nissan huts and very, very primitive arrangements at Kapooka. And
Kapooka, where's Kapooka?
Kapooka's down near Wagga. It was called the 1st Recruit Training Battalion, and it was very tough. I mean, the objective of the training was basically to weed out those who couldn't put up with it. I was a pretty hopeless recruit, 18-year-old, irresponsible pretty much.
You were always, they struggled, because I read on the manuscript, for you to conform. You were always outspoken, second guessing, speaking up to your higher ups.
Yeah, that's right. And that's really not the military way of doing things. And 3 months there, and the objective of the instructors in many ways was to bash out of you all your civilian traits and get you to conform to what the army required. And quite a few, I think half a dozen of my recruit course ended up walking out the gate and disappearing because they didn't want to play anymore, and that was pretty understandable. I was singled out for some pretty rough treatment, but I didn't resent it too much. I thought, well, that's fair enough, and I managed to survive that in a very mediocre way, and of course, those who had a bit of talent and showed a bit of potential went to more interesting jobs like maybe signals or even catering and places like that.
Yeah.
But those who were pretty useless like me went to the infantry centre,
Yeah.
and we were singled out to become basically private soldiers in the infantry battalions.
Yeah.
And that was how I went through the system, and I wasn't really cut out for it, but you know, I didn't have much choice. You know, I had to get an income, and I had a wife and a baby at the time, and I needed some money.
Is it true back then that judges, if kids were playing up, they were actually saying it's either jail or you
Yeah.
go to the Defence Force sometimes?
Well, you got a real mixed bag in at that lowest possible level, right at the bottom end of the military food chain, and you had, you know, a couple of my mates had, you know, were petty criminals, I suppose. Carthy's very good mate ended up in the army as a car thief. He fronted the magistrate, and his advocate put the proposition up. My client is attempting to join the army, and a conviction would work against him. So could you defer any action until we see whether the army will take him or not?
Wow.
And that happened quite a bit. And
Yeah.
and
Gee, that's a good way. That's
there's that sort of, and you know, we had a lot of kids from the family farms trying to escape, you know, the old small holdings like the dairy farms in Queensland. They were pretty good soldiers, by the way, because you know, those kids who brought up rough in the bush knew how to look after themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have known how to iron a shirt, let alone polish a pair of boots. So you know, it was a bit of a
they were onto it.
yeah, it was a bit of an experience for me. But I ended up, of course, going through that. Usually around about the bottom of the class, I suppose, of the courses that I did, and as a result, I was posted as a private soldier rifleman to an infantry platoon in a rifle battalion as 1 RAR at Holsworthy. That's how I ended up in the mainstream military.
So your platoon or battalion is what, 1 RAR?
Well, the battalion 1 RAR.
Battalion 1 RAR.
And one 1st Royal Australian Regiment of Infantry, and
So you got farmers,
school dropouts, criminals,
school
well,
dropouts.
you know, unconvicted criminals as a rule. I knew a couple who basically were illiterate, couldn't read and write, who got in, you know. And, you know, I mean, to be an infantry soldier, you know, you didn't need all that many skills. I mean, and you were given, prior to active service, I mean, you know, you spent a lot of time doing meaningless type tasks and lots of inspections, rifle drill, rifle training on weapon training. We had, you know, you fired maybe once or twice every 6 months because there was no ammunition for training. There was no transport was very limited. We did a lot of exercises in places like Singleton, up Colo Putty area, and down in Darks Forest, down in towards Wollongong. Totally inappropriate for any sort of tropical warfare.
Yeah.
And because Canungra hadn't got going as a jungle training centre by then, and we didn't have any jungle training at all.
Yeah, no jungle training at all. Right, so did I read in the manuscript you went to Port Moresby for training?
Yeah, well, that was probably our first experience. I think it was in 1964. I'd been in the army then probably less than 12 months, but my company was sent up to New Guinea. It was during what was known as confrontation with the Indonesians over the formation of Malaysia and the separation of Malaya from the British Commonwealth or British control. Yeah. And the Indonesians had some dispute over it. I forget what it was all about. Yeah. But there was some thought that there was problems up on the Irian Jaya Papua New Guinea border, which was Irian Jaya was owned by the Indonesians. It had become part of Indonesia, and there was some border problems, and so they sent my company up to a airstrip short of the border, and we did a long march with 10 days rations and 10 days ammunition up onto the border. And that was basically, in retrospect, that was some sort of a warming up or trial thing for a commitment later. I think the politicians and the higher ups sort of knew we were gearing up for something bigger.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
And that exercise, PJ, showed very clearly that you would have been struggling to beat the Balinese Boy Scouts, let alone Ho Chi Minh's bloody Viet Cong, or what they called them then, the National Liberation Front.
Oh, yeah. Gosh. Oh, gosh.
But, you know, our boots fell to pieces, our uniforms rotted, we couldn't supply ourselves. I think for that, 10 or 12 days up and back, about 100k up and back. It was all through swamp and rain.
You lost some weight?
Oh, yeah, you sure did. And I think we had a small aircraft that flew over us every now and again and dropped a pair of boots or something. That was about our resupply, single engine aircraft. So it was a pretty tough going, but it did, I think, show to the powers that be that we really needed to upgrade the gear we had.
Yeah.
It was
so
pretty basic.
Fast forward, then you got the fucking call.
Yeah, well, I was on guard. I was still down in my old platoon, 5 platoon down in B Company, and
in Australia now.
In Australia, yeah, we're back from New Guinea.
Yep.
And I was on guard duty, and the word came over that 1 battalion would be sent to Vietnam, and we didn't know whether it was a battalion or our battalion. But it sort of trickled through that, it was probably 1 battalion, our battalion was going. And we sort of knew, there was only 3 battalions then really that were, and one of them had just come back from Malaysia and one of them was only part formed. So it was pretty sure that we'd be going. And I had an old experienced corporal who was my guard commander, and he advised me to go over the hill, to disappear, don't go to Vietnam. He said, he was there with the French Foreign Legion, and he said, that's not going to be fun. And everybody else thought it was just likely to be, for us, a bit of a repeat of what was going on in Malaysia at the time, which was, there was what they called CTs, communist terrorists, who objected to the way the independence was being put in place, and there was a bit of a armed force instituted by the communist terrorists, and an Australian battalion was set up to chase them around the jungle up there. I don't think they did much damage. I think the only one they ever killed, according to rumour, was the ice cream seller who got in the wrong spot. But that was probably a rumour.
So you got word, and what was going through you and your wife's head about that? What were your wife thinking? What the fuck?
Well, the wife at the time didn't really seem to know much about what I was doing anyway.
Okay.
I mean, she was looking out. By that time, I had 2 little toddlers, 1 baby and a toddler, so she was very much involved in
house duties.
Kids'
duties.
So whatever came up. But I back in my platoon. I was pretty much of a nuisance, I think, to the powers that be in the platoon, particularly my old platoon sergeant. He wasn't old, he was probably 27, but he was a very good bloke and a good sergeant, and he did everything he could to find me a position that suited me and suited him, because I was a bloody nuisance to him. And so he tried to send me to another battalion. I just said, I'm not going. Tried to send me down to another platoon. I said, I'm not going. Then one day he came to me and said, hey Bob, there's a job going up in Signal Platoon, up in the supports company. You'd be really interested in that. So I said, I'll check it out, because I wasn't very good at obeying orders.
Well, why do you think you could get away with that? And other blokes wouldn't, they just get...
Well,
why were you getting away with all this playing up, second-guessing, back-chatting?
Yeah, well, as long as you're stuck to paying the appropriate courtesies, there wasn't a great deal of imposed discipline, unless you really, played up bad. And but
You walk
Yeah,
the fine
and
line.
the senior people, the sergeants and above, they were pretty tolerant. You know,
Yeah.
they knew they had all types. A lot of juvenile delinquents they were trying to keep under control and keep busy, and yeah, it was. Pretty good, and so I went up to where Signal Platoon was, up in Support Company. Support Company was the outfit that provided communications, mortars, assault parties, basically infantry engineers and anti-tank people to support the companies, the rifle companies. So that was the communication part of that company. And I went up there and found a couple of no-hopers like myself sitting in the gutter with a flag and a plonk, and they'd just arrived there, and I said, "What's it like up here?" And they said, "Oh, it's easy, very few duties, no problems, better than the companies." So I went back and saw my platoon sergeant and said, "Yeah, I think I'll go up there." So I said, "Well, pack your bongos, away you go." And I ended up in, a month or two before we went to Vietnam, I ended up coming out of the rifle company and going up to the support company, yeah.
Let's just go to the boat.
The ship.
The ship, what was the name of it?
HMAS Sydney.
Yep.
It was World War II. Everything we had was World War II.
Nothing.
No,
do they update the stuff a little bit?
No, not much. At that time, we were still sort of kitted up and transported by the most mundane stuff that you could imagine. So anyway, the old Sydney, yeah, well, in the still of night, in June '65, we were put on trucks and without any fanfare whatsoever, shipped down to the quay and boarded the old converted aircraft carrier, HMAS Sydney, for its first trip up to Vietnam.
When you say no fanfare, no people on the
No,
docks?
nothing like that. There was
Thanks
no
for your
holding the
service.
ribbons or
No
something.
ribbons? Oh.
No, nothing at all. Just it was sort of kept fairly low key, I think, because I don't think that the powers that be really knew much about what was going on and what we were going to do and how it was going to pan out. You know, every war is going to be over by Christmas, isn't it? You know, everyone heads off saying, "Oh, this will all be over by Christmas," but as it turned out, that was right. But it was Christmas 10 years later.
And the boat trip would have suited you to a T. Smoking lots of cigarettes, gambling,
Yeah,
alcohol.
the whole thing. I mean,
What did you do on the boat? I read it. You all were sucking up to the caterer, the chef.
Oh yeah.
Because?
Yeah, well, my mate got sent down, juvenile delinquents ran pretty free on the ship going over, and the Navy was under really tight discipline. Unbelievable. None of us ever wanted to be in the Navy after that trip. I mean, it was, but they let us. They didn't impose too much on us. We had a few things that we had to do, like a bit of PT and firing at balloons off the back of the ship occasionally and usual stuff. But we had a fair bit of free time and made a general nuisance of ourselves, or I certainly did with my little mob of recalcitrants. And my mate, who I ended up teaming up with, was a real problem child. And he got, they used to announce on the ship 3 or 4 times a day, this call over the loudspeakers for exercise, for exercise, for exercise, man the port seaboat. And this went on and on and on. So the mate, we all got sick of it. You know, the sailors all run around, jump in boats. I don't know what they did, but it was some sort of drill in case she sprung a leak or something, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But so he found out where they were making these announcements from, and checked it out. Went down and took over the speaker. And he came up, "This is not an exercise, this is not an exercise. Enemy aircraft approaching from the port side. Man, all guns, man." And this caused a bit of a problem, and everyone's running around. And anyway, the powers that be sent the heavies up, and they grabbed him and threw him in the brig. And he had to front the captain. It was pointed out to him that by using that speaker, you overrode all the ship's communications, and they're trying to steer the old tub through up in the Coral Sea somewhere at the time. So he got sent down to work down the galley with the cooks and all the rest of it. And of course he...
Which was a godsend.
Oh yeah, I mean, because we were limited to 1 can a day, beer. And you know, many of us being apprentice alcoholics at the time, he discovered the secret of why the cooks always seemed happy. They were on the lemon essence with about 90% alcohol mixed with soft drinks, which they call goffers. Yeah. Goffer
Where there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, always a light at the end of the tunnel, mate. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to work with the chef. Oh no.
no, please don't throw me in that blackberry bush. Yeah. Yeah, no, that was an interesting trip up there. We all ended up broke because the smarties were running their gambling, Crown and Anchor and all that, so any money we had went in a hurry. And yeah, we you know, there were forbidden areas on the ship. We used to go just in there and sleep or lie on the floor or whatever. Yeah. And you know,
right.
Anyway, so it was.
That's the boat life. Anything else you want to add to that? Because I just wanted to. You're like me. We're atheists.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a father on the boat?
Yeah.
Well,
chaplain. Yeah.
But I found this bit really interesting, Bobby, in the manuscript. So Father Gary was doing a talk,
yep.
And Bob jumps up and jumps on his feet, hand up and spouting, "Excuse me, Father, but what about thou shalt not kill? Isn't that a sin that gets you a ticket straight to hell?" Father Gary had apparently been briefed on this particular dilemma and began to explain that the kill in the commandment actually meant murder, and killing in warfare in defense of one's country was not considered to be murder by the big fella upstairs. "Ah," thought Bob, "the good Lord, in whom I don't even believe, hath delivered him to me. Oh, I see," he exclaimed. "So the word of God, as written in the 10 Commandments, has been changed by someone. And beg your pardon, Father," this is the bit I love. "I beg your pardon, Father. Can you explain how killing Asians in a country 10,000 miles from Australia could be categorised as in defence of one's country?" Mic drop. That would have fucking... And long story short, but we're going to talk about this quickly, but then they didn't really appreciate that to you, and then the boss came down to you and said, "Bob, you don't have to attend any more church parades. Enjoy the rest of your trip," and he slammed the door.
Yeah.
So, just run that.
Yeah. Anyway, after that, I got on pretty well with him when we were in country. He loved a bet and a beer, so he was all right.
Is there a lot of Bible bashing?
No, not much. No. I mean, it was all pretty.
He probably would have liked that you were outspoken a bit and questioning the 10 Commandments.
We had a padre come to the field there once. We were out in the bush, and the boss, the company commander I was working under at the time, came around and said, "Righto, we've got a padre plan out. Now, put up your hands if you're a Catholic." And nobody put up their hands. And he said, "Good, he's a Protestant now, all get out there." So he got us for that anyway. So he brought the old guitar out and we sang a few hymns or something. But anyway, so we're all Protestants for that particular one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to talk about on the boat? Or
No, only the fact, PJ, that I don't know about other people. Like all this stuff's only my reflections. Other people would have seen it totally different, obviously. But I didn't know, and I had the impression that at my level we didn't really know basically where we were going apart from Vietnam. Yep. We didn't know where we were landing, we didn't know where we would be deployed, we didn't know we were going to be deployed with an American unit or whatever. We sort of knew nothing, right?
Yep.
And and we also didn't know when we came ashore what would the reception be, because there's a lot of news stories about things were getting pretty violent over in Vietnam. There was a lot of action going on, and we didn't know where. I'd seen the movie with John Wayne, The Longest Day, so I was a bit of an expert on beach landings.
Don't talk about beach landing yet. Hold that thought. Hitting the beach.
Hitting the beach.
Hitting the beach. Chapter 5. Combat ready, weapons loaded, and clad in basic gear. The troops steeled themselves for the trial by fire awaiting them when they hit the beach. Jesus, thought Bob. It could be Gallipoli all over again as he carefully manoeuvred himself to the rear of the craft. Fuck.
Yeah, well, wouldn't you?
Yes. But, and that ties in with where you just seen, is it the John Wayne?
Yeah, the movie The Longest Day, which was about the landing on Omaha Beach in D-Day.
Was that really that shit going through your head?
Yeah, well, you know, because we came down the side of the ship, the old Sydney, exactly as the way they would have got into a World War II type landing craft, right?
Yeah.
Heading for the beach, which is some distance off. This is at Vung Tau Harbour. And as we later found out, because we didn't know very much, but it had the big thing to come down. We had to go ashore, and we were all helmeted up, rifles at the high port, combat ready. So we didn't really know what to expect, or I didn't anyway. Other people may have. But
what's the feeling inside in your belly?
Oh, yeah.
Was some of your mates? Was there some guys just wigging out? Did anyone wig out? Like, I can't do this?
No. See, we
weren't really knowing what's going on.
I think.
What to expect?
Yeah, we're all pretty.
Bring it on.
Ground down by the army system, right? Buckle up and obey orders and just see what happens. But I don't think anyone was too concerned. But it's more the look than anything else. Probably, I don't suppose we expected to get Omaha Beach or anything like that. But
in reality, what happened?
Well, when the ramp went down, of course, there's the biggest reception committee you've ever seen, and ladies with leis to put around people's necks, and the Salvation Army man there with some undrinkable stuff for us to drink. So it's a bit sling your rifle and what's going on now. Yeah? And after it all clears out, everyone sort of finds a place to sit down and make a brew or whatever, and wander around asking if anyone knows what's going on.
Yeah.
Because nobody did.
Yeah.
That was a big issue with that 1st Battalion. There was no precedent for what we were doing. So there was nothing in place, really. We had to make do with what we had. And I'm sure the people higher up had the same problem, waiting for orders. What are we going to do? So at sometime in the next day or so, it filtered through that we were going to be flown up to a big airbase north of 20 or 30 k north of Saigon, and we were going to be part of the defensive structure of that airbase. And we sort of knew that the airbase would have a big town around it, which it did, Benoit City, and there'd be plenty of opportunities later on for all sorts of stuff, alcohol and various places of ill fame and all the rest of it around
activities.
The place. Yeah, activities. So it wasn't too bad of a prospect to go up to that. And we were told that there was what they had up there. The Americans had put in recently, probably a month or so earlier, an airborne brigade. And a brigade is 3 battalions, but the airborne brigade, 173rd, only had 2 battalions. It was 1 battalion short. So we made up the 3rd Battalion to make it a brigade, and that was part of the. Originally, it was deployed to be a protection component of the airbase because it was very vulnerable to mortar fire, particularly. And that had a couple of really bad attacks and quite a lot of aircraft destroyed there before we arrived. So that was going to be basically our job, was mainly to be a guarding force for the airbase. They dumped us out in a disused rubber plantation full of long grass with absolutely nothing there, and that was home for 12 months. That was our base, and we had to develop that into a defensive position and a place we could operate from. So, of course, lots of barbed wire put up around, made a big barbed wire perimeter.
A lot of housekeeping.
A lot of housekeeping. Very primitive. Just living under little hutchies, torrential rain, digging holes, fill them in again, fill a million sandbags, put them here. That's not the right place. Pick them up, put them somewhere else. Dig big hole, fill big hole in. Try to cut down rubber stumps. Try to put up some facilities.
Yep.
It was very, very primitive.
Yeah.
And we were separated from the Americans, part of that larger unit, but pretty much separated from them. Yeah.
So that was, and then you had to go out.
Well, as you know, you had to
What do they call it?
find out a bit of a role, I suppose. You know, down at my level, we never knew very much at all. We just did what we were told, pretty much, or what we couldn't get away with. And as part of the hard jobs, of course, all done by the rifle platoons, by the riflemen and machine gunners and so scouts out with the sharp end, if you like. Yep. So they're out patrolling all the time, generally,
yep,
to keep any problems from outsiders while we're getting set up.
Yep.
Our job, my original job with the signals people, was to be part of what was the line section. That's where all the people who were no good for anything else went before they learnt how to be a proper signaller. So
yep,
we were laying a lot of line, getting communications up within the area,
yep,
outside the area, laying line outside to supporting units and all that sort of stuff.
yep,
Digging it, stringing it from trees, or stringing it from poles, pulling it down, digging trenches to bury it in, pulling it out again. It was just on and off, trying to get things set up. At the same time, you're trying to organise somewhere to basically live.
yep,
And
yep.
you're just living out of ration packs at this stage. It was all pretty primitive.
What's a ration pack consist of?
Well, we immediately went on to American ration packs, and they had everything in them pretty much. But whereas we had these little 24-hour packs. But
So you were getting your hands on American ration packs?
right. See, basically a lot of our logistics and supply and transport and all the rest of it was provided by Americans.
Yep, yep.
We did as much as we could with our own resources, but this was a pretty hurried operation. I mean, to get set up there, and we had to learn as we went, and we had to beg, borrow, and steal what we could. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, it was an interesting time. And of course, there's a lot of action going, a lot of artillery being fired over us, and we never really knew what was outgoing or incoming. Some activity outside the wire of
Yep,
various shoot-ups, and there's a lot of stress because we didn't know. You know, we just didn't know what was going on. I certainly didn't.
yep.
Other people might have.
And I remember you telling me when your higher-ups were having these meetings in the tents,
Yeah.
you just walk in and sit in there.
Oh, but basically, when we got settled and sort of got a bit acclimatised, a bit familiar with what's going on, we started to move out and do what was called operations, basically missions outside the wire.
Yes.
So as a signaller, you're always going out. You spend more time outside the wire than inside.
Yep.
And later on, that's right, I was never afraid to inject myself into anything because they sort of let you do it, you know. And if there was an intelligence briefing going on with the CO, and I was free, I just wandered down and sit down, and they'd just give you a look, and you must be here for something, you know. And I'd just listen and then go back and sort of pass it on to people that what I'd heard and all the rest of it.
And when you venture out operations,
Yeah.
would you venture out? Would they always intel tell you this is green, this is safe, it's safe to venture out in a 2K radius, or you had no idea? You just venture out and do operation. What would the operation consist of?
Well, early in the piece, we got familiar with what they called the tactical area of operation. Of course, we've always got an acronym, a TAOR, and that's the area a couple of kilometres out the front of you,
Yep.
right, of your sector.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that that's pretty well clear of potential, enemy potential, and that's where a lot of the mortaring was previously coming from, right, to the airbase. So early, operations early weren't far away from the base, and they might have only last 2 days, 3 days, or 1 day even. So, but you spent more than half the time outside rather than in the base camp, outside the wire. And but as the thing developed, PJ, then it started, they call it mission creep, I think, in the term. You start to go further and further and further out.
Yeah, tell us about that. And any scary times?
Yeah, well, some of the operations were, fairly calm. There was always people getting wounded. Occasionally, you'd have a person killed.
From sniper?
From contacts. They used to the rifle sections were the sharp end of the game. As you further went back, like into the more support areas where I spent most of my time, you were less likely to hit that hard problem, and they suffered quite a few. My old platoon had 3 or 4 killed. In fact, out of that small platoon, less than 30 people, and probably half the platoon wounded. The one I came from, up to Signal Platoon, 05 Platoon, they had a pretty tough tour. So I was lucky to get out of the platoon. But the way we were operating mostly was pretty much standard format for infantry throughout history. Of the scouts out the front, the command group and machine gun group in the centre. This is a 10-men section. They're the ones who do the job. 2 scouts.
Imagine being a scout.
Forward scouts. Yeah, I did the job a couple of times, but only in the tail, and it focuses your attention a bit.
Yeah.
But you had you had the 2 scouts for a section, which is the basic unit run by corporal, the most important man in the army, corporal. He runs the show. He's the bloke who commands his 10 men, right? And that's probably the most important level of command in the infantry anyway. And your 2 scouts, the corporal and a radio man and his machine gunner and his 2IC, and then a couple of riflemen on the flanks and one at the rear, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you got that, and they have different formations in accordance with the type of terrain, right? Yep. So open, they'll open out and they'll change format. Yeah. But anyway, that's another story, I guess. But so we did operations up to a couple of weeks, from a few days to a couple of weeks, and I think outside the wire, and a long way out sometimes. We went up. Ben Cat was a fair way up. That was what the Americans with their theatrical usage of terminology. They called that the Iron Triangle up at Ben Cat, and that was a pretty nasty operation. A week or two there. We did a couple of ones that were much more dynamic than a lot of the shorter ones. We did one called Rolling Stone, which we worked as a battalion. I think we were put in under the command of the Big Red One, the 1st Division, which is probably an interesting connection. Big Red One was the division that landed on Omaha Beach, so it's got a bit of background. Yeah, right. And we did a protection job for them up where they were building. They had armoured bulldozers with their engineers building a road, and we were supposed to do the protection of that operation. Yeah. And we were in a bit of a rubber plantation where I was stationed with my corporal, and I said, I'll go down and listen to the intelligence brief and see what's going on, mate. And he said, yeah, right. So I went down and listened to it. And basically they said, the intelligence people and briefed the CO and his people, commanding officer and his people, that there was no intelligence on any enemy activity within a 20 kilometre radius of where we were stationed. And so
it's safe.
Yeah. So I went back, and my mate said, oh, well, I suppose we better dig a trench. He said, you better start digging a trench. I said, we won't need a trench. I said, there's just no activity.
There's no activity for 20...
No, yeah, he said, oh, go on, mate. No, and he was a corporal. And of course, I met him years later. He said, you never obeyed one order I ever gave you, did you? I thought I might have. But I said, look, I'll spit log, just dig it about that deep. I said, you can do a bit of work on it and I'll make a brew or something to eat or something, yeah. We argued about that for a while, and we decided we wouldn't bother. And anyway, late that night, around about midnight, a bloody regiment came through us. You know, 300 or 400 of Viet Cong stormed right through our position, right? And the Americans, of course, got in against the American engineer mob, which also had a protection unit inside, and they were firing out at the attacking people. All that stuff's coming through us. Me and my mate are sitting in this trench about that deep, and he's calling me a few names by this stage. But and that was a pretty heavy old night. And by after a couple of hours, they just pulled back, and it was quite an interesting night. And I went down and crawled down to where we were, down to where the SIGs were operating, and I was listening to one American in a tank. He was calling fire on himself because there was Viet Cong crawling all over his tank trying to stuff charges to blow it up, and he was calling the machine gun his own tank. Yeah, you know, it was pretty hairy, and so that was a bit interesting. Yeah, but they called that Operation Rolling Stone, but the old Americans seemed to take it all pretty casually. There was a sniper about, and they were playing basically touch football, throwing the football to each other up and down this.
Now, American football?
Yeah, American football, yeah, that's right. Gridiron, sort of running up and down. Somebody got shot in the leg, and they carted him off and came back and kept playing, throwing the ball around. I think the sniper had gone home by then. I hope so, anyway. We were watching this, and
the real casual, just different, really different types of soldiers.
Oh, the Americans, see, that was the issue, PJ, with...
I've got just before you keep going, Bob, my audience is 40% American.
Are they? That's all right. No, I've got no... The Americans are extremely brave. They were very brave soldiers. And that's true.
Stop it.
But we operated differently. The Americans were looking for a big fight. We weren't.
Yes. Talk a bit... They just... And we're not knocking my American audience. They are bloody. They had
a lot of good friends, and they were good soldiers. Yeah, they just operated differently.
They want the head. They want the kills, don't they?
They want
stats. Is that right?
They wanted to draw. See, the Americans had tremendous indirect fire support. As much air as you could imagine, from gunships to bloody B-52s. They had a lot. And even at one stage they had a battleship firing from them. You know?
Yeah, right out, and they just...
Yeah, so, I mean, they had everything. All the artillery in the world, up to the biggest artillery piece you'd imagine, they never moved generally never moved outside that support. So they wanted to make contact with large numbers of the enemy, and then use their indirect fire support, you know, and get into the real business. Whereas we tend to sneak around a lot, you know, because, you know, I think there was, our commanders, I think, were pretty much aware that a large casualty count wouldn't go over too well. They were just introducing national service back in Australia, which was to become pretty controversial, conscription, right? Yeah. So, you know, there was no great desire, I think, to get involved in those really big firefights. But the Americans got involved in some, our sister battalion got involved in some very heavy stuff, you know, particularly the 1st 503rd Battalion, which was our sister battalion, yeah.
Did they know war tactics with the Vietnamese? I remember you telling me at a Christmas party, they'll come down, the Vietnamese, stir them up, get the Americans or whoever they're fighting to come in, and then they're trapped, to lead them up to somewhere.
Yeah, well
tell us about that, how they do that.
You know, the
tactics.
The Vietnamese party, communist party, I suppose, or supporters, I suppose you'd call them, that is from the North Vietnamese army through to the Viet Cong. They're pretty experienced at that type of warfare. I mean, they'd beaten the French only a few years before. Yeah. And the French were a huge army, so they had they were used to coming up against armies and military with superior firepower, and they weren't at all militarily stupid. You know, the big commander, old General Giap, was probably one of the most efficient and capable generals in history. I mean, under his command, he defeated two armies. So he's two major Western armies. So yeah, that's what. They weren't stupid. And the thing, as a radio operator, although from my platoon, I don't think we had anyone. We didn't have anyone killed. We had a lot of people wounded, some very seriously.
Yeah.
But for a start, if you get involved in a major fight with these people, what they want to do is take out the communications. So getting around with a large aerial on you, you're immediately targeted. That area is targeted. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you haven't got communications, half your control of the situation is gone, or more than half. And so, we tended to use whip aerials that could stick under your lapel. So, it was inhibited your communications a bit, but it made you a little bit safer without a big aerial sticking up. So
you just tuck it under. Yeah.
It was whip aerial you tuck under your epaulette.
Yeah.
And well. That tactic, of course, I read a lot about it before and after going to Vietnam. There's a lot about the French engagements over there with their army, and we thought we'd learnt a lot from what the French had done. I think our commanders did anyway. But the objective was for them to draw, if they had a main force action, to draw the American and Allied forces into contact with them, and then not let them pull back. And they called it hanging onto the enemy's belt. So they'd say basically, you want to use your indirect fire support, you're going to be with us, right?
Oh yeah.
So it was a pretty common sense tactic. I mean, both sides. I mean, the Americans. That was their whole tactic. It was to get big battles, and they're very brave. I mean, they had a lot of people killed and wounded. We had one operation that I was involved in called the Hump, where our sister battalion, 153, had 49 killed. 49. Can you imagine how many wounded out of that little lot?
Yeah.
And that was a major. They ran into a major force which we just missed, although my company had come down through this area, and we had a follow-up company coming after us, and they got hit badly. Two of our people killed. One of my mates from over there was killed there, and never got the bodies out for another 30 years. But that was obviously a bottom part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail we were on there. You could drive trucks down the area we were going through, and you could see that there were plenty of bad guys around, and the Americans ran into a bunch of them, and
And you'd sometimes get intel. Oh, there's no one there, but you go in there, Bob, and you can smell fish sauce.
Yeah, I think that.
And you see their cigarettes, and you knew they were just there. Is that right? Tell us about.
Well, you knew that. See, at my level, the amount of intel, wasn't really of much interest to us, because we'd just do what we'd told pretty much, or do our job. We weren't even told to do much. You sort of knew what you had to do.
Yeah.
But
how did you know that the enemy's been there?
Well, in retrospect, that particular operation called the Hump. It was called the Hump because the 173rd Brigade, that was their 6 months period in Vietnam. So once you got over that, you're over the hump. That's why they call it the Hump. But it was probably, again, in retrospect and reading a bit more about it, it was probably not a good idea, that operation. I don't think we were in a position to do that. It probably should have been a much bigger or differently planned thing, because it could have been very bad for us. I mean, I'd have to say that given what happened to 6th Battalion, which took over from us down at Nui Dat with the battle at Long Tan, that was a big possibility with us on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
We were pretty lucky to avoid stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the Americans certainly had those big battles, and a couple of them, they were. See, again, our army setup was different to theirs. on what they call the regimental basis, which is an old British way of doing things, where your battalion's your family.
Yep.
You go to war with your family.
Yep.
You do the job as a family. You come home with your family.
Yep.
If you get captured as a unit, you all go in together, right? So it's a very family arrangement with the regiment, whereas the Americans replaced. They put a unit in, it stays there for the duration, and they just replace the numbers all the time. So you don't really have that same
Click.
sort of family relationship.
Yeah.
Like my battalion, or one battalion, the battalion club exists all your army career. You know?
Yeah.
Even if you're out of the unit,
Yeah.
you're always looked after by your club.
How long were you actually over there for?
We were over there for a year, but we didn't know that when we went there. We weren't told that until we'd been there about 9 months, as far as I knew.
So you've been there for a year, and this interview is not to spruce up warfare, killing and deaths and all that, but you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Do they say to you, you got time off, you got 2 weeks off, you get a week off, and you got to act like a civilian after seeing deaths and everything? What did you get time off? Do you get?
Yeah. Well, what they had, PJ, is you had a couple of systems that were introduced. Again, there was no precedent for any of this that I'm aware of. It may have existed in other wars, but you had what you call R&R for about a week or 5 or 6 days.
What's that for people?
And then you had, I think they called it R&C, had a couple of days at a coastal place in Vietnam. And then you had the occasional, maybe once a month or something, day off in Saigon, right, as a booze extravaganza, you know, basically. Yeah.
Well, what's rest and recuperation?
Rest and recuperation, I think it was, or rest and recreation, I forget what it was called. Yeah. But again, that was. I went to Bangkok after about, I don't know, six months, I suppose, and even that was basically. You knew that eventually you'd get called out to go on R&R. They're getting a few through all the time from the companies. The companies' first preference generally, which was only fair. They did all the hard work, in my view, and. So you basically say, go and jump on the truck that's going to Saigon, get yourself out at the airport, jump on a plane going to Bangkok, and go and have your R&R.
Yeah.
And
as a civilian.
Well, you just take the uniform off, get hold of.
So they expect you just to adjust to a civilian.
Work it out, yeah. Work it out, and so.
That's madness.
And there's sort of no way. Get to Bangkok. There's no one there to say, you go to here or go to there. You just sort of
walk it around with.
I picked up an American mate, a very nice guy, a Marine sergeant, young guy, and we stuck together and with the intention of behaving ourselves, which lasted for about an hour. And I ended up saying, I think I had to catch a plane back after 5 days or something, but I think I got back to Saigon about 10 days. I was about 5 days missing in action, wandering around Saigon, again with no money, met up with another American who bought me drinks, gave me money and took me to the Special Forces. He was a Special Forces bloke. Took me to their camp and put me up for a couple of nights.
You just went,
I just didn't turn up. And
see this guy,
I
can't control him.
Yeah, and he wanted me to go up to a place called Pleiku with him. He was going to make me a corporal, and he... I had a few drinks with him, more than a few, and I said, yeah, I'll go. But he said, they obviously don't need me out where I am. But next morning I woke up, he throws a rifle on my bed, my stretcher and some webbing. He said, let's go, we'll catch the plane up to Pleiku. By that time I'd sobered up. So I ended up, I forget how I got back out to Benoit. I think I hitchhiked on an American vehicle or something. Yeah. But I got back out and walked into a camp and it was empty. No one there. And they'd been out in operations for about a week. They didn't know I was missing. So when they got back, they said, how'd you enjoy your R&R? Yeah, good, mate, no worries. I was 5 days AWOL. Nobody missed me.
No one missed you?
Nobody missed me. No,
getting in trouble?
I was able to go to another mess and get fed and all the rest of it, and they'd all gone to the bush. So, yeah. And it was a pretty bad operation they were on too, apparently, which I was glad I missed. Yeah.
Any other scary moments we could just touch on,
I think that
or any close calls, or
yeah, there was always something going on. I mean, we were young and pretty. I was anyway. You know, most of us were. I'd say the average days was about 20 of our privates. You know, and you know how you'd be aware of how sensible and responsible you are around that age, wouldn't you, PJ? You know, and we weren't much different. So. A high level of stress everywhere, you know. Yeah. You could call it stress, I suppose, but anxiety. But you know, there wasn't much. There's never much fear or anything like that displayed. I mean, you get to be very alert once you're outside the wire, particularly because you know everything's a possibility. Particularly. As in more recent wars, the old IEDs, they call them now, improvised explosive devices, which we used to call booby traps, and plenty of them.
Leads me to leads me to my next question, and this is in a comedy joke. Who had the metal detector?
Who had the metal detector?
Did you have a metal detector?
Well, down at sort of the basic level, not much. But the engineers were certainly getting around with those things like you use. There was a lot of that goes on because you know, where there was tracks or roads, and particularly when you had those armoured personnel carriers, which we were very nervous about.
They're not that armoured, are they?
They're not very well armoured at all. But the Viet Cong were very good at improvising explosive devices, and particularly out of big ones, out of artillery shells, which make a big bang. And they would put them under roads, and they blew a couple of our APCs over. And,
just flip it.
They would just about immobilise a tank. And some of those things. So
nearly a tank.
Yeah, they just about bust a tank up. Yep. But a couple of them nose to nose, and then initiated with a command detonated situation. But so you know, there's quite a lot of an engineer task, to my knowledge, was of course to do those sort of clearances in areas where it was known that this sort of thing was going on. So they'd get along and start doing that with these things. But down at our level, not much. We had our own internal engineers called field engineers, and they did a lot of the demos. We mostly found stuff by stepping on them, you know, or with a bit of fishing line tied to something, and you kick that and off you go. We had a lot of wounded through those things. Even at headquarters level, a lot of people blown up.
So those medics are fucking amazing, eh? Like.
Yeah, well, again, down at the sharp end, the medics were bandsmen, right? If you're a bandy,
musician.
Musician.
Yeah.
With the infantry.
Yeah.
The infantry all had bands.
Yeah.
That was your job on operations, and we had a couple killed who should have got BCs, in my opinion, but anyway, they didn't. But going out to get wounded and people.
Taking fire, looking after someone.
Yeah.
You have to have eyes in the back of your head, see what's going on, try and look after you.
But again, you know, the sniper stuff, one of the tactics that they would use, of course, is don't kill the first guy that you shoot. This is the sniper tactics.
From the Vietnam?
Well, probably from most snipers over history.
Yeah, don't kill the first person.
But wait for the people to come and get him out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let him
go to rescue the guy who's wounded.
Sorry, don't kill him, let him just be wounded, then they...
Yeah, well, it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're into that sort of thing. Yeah, well, you know, if you're going to finish up, PJ, I want to say, none of this is meant to reflect anybody else's views on anything.
No.
This is just my perception on a bit of it. Yeah. It's a tiny little bit of it. There's a lot of things that happened that, particularly on the humorous side, you know, juvenile delinquents as we were, we found a lot of ways to get into trouble and do stupid bloody things. And
tell us one.
Well, you know, I was trying to think. Well, we used to steal vehicles. The Americans sort of were very trustworthy and left keys in the bloody thing. So Yeah, we used to, we had, everything stacked around our area at one stage that we'd used for transport home from a illicit trip into town. And we found a way out through the wire, myself and a mate, and we used to basically do escorts of people to take them into town. We knew how to do it. So I got brought back by the military police twice. And the last time this guy patted his pistol and said, "Don't let us pick you up again." And they had a reputation for having notches on their guns, those military police. That's the American police.
And you also used to knock off the American stuff. And Americans, you were telling me, had the better guns, better clothing.
Well, they were very generous with us. I mean,
you didn't have to knock it off.
I mean, you look at the equipment. We went over there with those, what they call 10 sets, and we reckon they were manufactured in 1910. They just didn't work. They did not work. That was our radio. And so we had to get all the American radios. They loaded us up with a lot of M16s, a lot of equipment, and we used to just about dress, or I used to just about dress in American gear. It was much better. The boots were better, the outfits were better. I bought an AR-15 off a bloke for $15, which weighed about half as much as my old Army rifle SLR, so that was handy. But yeah, no, the Americans were very generous and they're very trusting. I think they didn't realise that they were their fellow battalion was a bunch of thieves and criminals, and we just made hay with their gear and everything. We sold the Brigadier General's Jeep once and smashed her all up. And,
But before we go, can you just tell people about Agent Orange?
Yeah, well, we didn't really know about that then, but we did operate in a couple of areas where there just wasn't a living thing, and it was just dead because everything had been sprayed. And
so Agent Orange is...
It's a defoliant. It's been used in Australia. It's sort of blackberry poison, but it's got a particular element in it that's very lethal, very poisonous. And we operated in a lot of those areas, well, not a lot, a couple of them. And you'd fill your water bottle up out of the creek, as that's going on. So I'm sure that there's been, I don't know that it's recognised as a problem in Australian veterans, but certainly the Americans recognised it as a real problem.
They didn't like it, and they fly the plane in, drop it from the plane.
Well, the idea was to deny the area to the enemy.
For coverage.
It wasn't very successful, I think, except to poison a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful country in a way, Vietnam. And
have you been back?
Yeah, I went back, and to go show what a quick learner I am, PJ.
Yeah.
When I was over there, I went on a day's leave in Saigon with a couple of mates and got robbed by a bunch of young fellas. There was a few gangs operating in Saigon at the time.
Yeah.
I went back 40 years later, I went downtown in Saigon and got robbed again. So, slow learner, mate.
You're a quick learner. You did the tour, it was interesting? Or?
Yeah, just went over with your mother for a week or so, a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And went out to an area that I'd been on operation, didn't recognise anything.
Yeah.
And the only people over there who seemed to be moping around were the old veterans from America or Australia. The Vietnamese just got on with it,
Yeah, right.
One of them said to me, "Oh, you've been here before?" I said, "Yeah, I was here in the war." He said, "Oh, what war was that?" I said, "The American War." "Oh, the American War. Oh, okay, yeah."
Oh, yeah, that one.
But he's younger than you. He wouldn't have a clue.
That's what I mean. They wouldn't have...
They'd never clue. No, you don't blame them. They get on with things. But
that's good.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. I'm certainly no advocate for war. It's
No.
the sooner it all finishes, the better, as far as I'm concerned, if it ever does. But it has its moments. You see a lot of good things, you see a lot of bad things, and you meet a lot of good people and a lot of doubtful people. So it's about the same as anything else.
Yeah.
But I stayed in, PJ. I got back and I was pretty much at a loose end. Nobody. Once I got out and went on leave, nobody had the slightest bit of interest in anything or anywhere that I'd been. Nobody asked me any questions. Nobody, even family didn't want to know anything. Friends didn't want to know anything. And so
Why was that?
I just,
Did it have a bad
I
stigma?
just think it was. They didn't have any context to put it in. I mean, soldiers, you go off somewhere, you come back from somewhere.
That's why this interview's so good.
Yeah, well, I think most of us didn't feel comfortable until our leave finished and we went back into the army, you're back into the battalion.
Yeah.
You're with fellow people, but once again, all the national servicemen are coming through then as well.
Yeah.
So you become a tighter and tighter little group. And I was very fortunate. I was a very poor soldier when I look back, but I had some good patrons. I could draw some cartoons. I could play the guitar a bit, and I was well looked after. And from being what we called a baggy ass foot slogger, with no courses under my belt at all, I was promoted pretty much immediately to a two-striper, a corporal, by the CO on behalf of my outstanding service in Vietnam. I was thinking, this has got to be a case of mistaken identity. And shortly after that, I was promoted to sergeant, and I was the youngest sergeant in the infantry. I was told by someone who would have known. I was 22 years of age, still pretty damn immature, ridiculously young to be an infantry sergeant, and then hived off into a technical training area, and I stayed in that for years, and I ended up being a warrant officer in that. Then I was commissioned, 23 years in the regular army, retired as a major in the reserve, spent a few more years in that, and then took another job. Yeah.
You've seen a lot of angles of the defence, a lot of facets of the defence force, eh? Not just one thing.
I was always a little bit proud is the wrong word, but I was always satisfied that I'd done my active service in the infantry.
Yeah.
The infantry is where it all happens. That's the sharp end of the game. There's a lot of people go to wars. The majority of them are not at that end of the game at all.
Yeah.
So being in the infantry for my period in Vietnam, even though I wouldn't pretend that I was at the sharp end, it was at the blunter end of the sharp end where I spent most of my time. But yeah, so that's a bit of satisfaction, Yeah. And since then, I've been lucky enough to have a pretty good life, and suffered a few injuries over there, and still carry a few injuries through accidents, and being kicked out of a helicopter once, which didn't do me much good, and it was about 10 metres up at the time.
You didn't bounce? You didn't bounce?
Well, I was carrying about 80 pounds a year.
Come on, man.
And I was sitting on the floor of the chopper, and the guy went, kick, out I went. But anyway, those stories can go on and on, PJ.
I know. It's getting a bit hot, isn't it?
Yeah, but...
you want to say anything? I know you just summed up.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that somebody of your generation has a little bit of interest in what is now pretty much ancient history. And particularly that particular battalion was sort of the forgotten battalion in many ways, that the interest switched very quickly to what was called the task force down at Nui Dat, and that's where the 6th Battalion, good mate who you knew as well, Pete Ainslie, was involved in that Battle of Long Tan. And so that was a whole different game to what we were playing.
Yes.
We were part of the American setup, and that's not much publicised at all. I've spoken to people who've asked about it, and I've told them we're with the 173rd Brigade at Benoit, and they didn't know about that. A lot of people didn't know about it.
They just know about the Battle of Long Tan, all those sort of...
Yeah, it's much more, the task force. Every movie was made about the task force, or like Odd Angry Shot and movies like that. Yeah. And the one, Danger Close, the recent one that they made. It's 6th Battalion. SAS, of course. Yeah. So,
SAS soldiers. Does that stand for soft as shit?
They were mostly reconnaissance type people, as far as I knew. Yeah. But anyway, as I say, PJ, we could go on about...
Well, we could go on and on, Bob, and thank you for your service, bud.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Fucking unreal.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to have a bit of a chat.
This for you. There's a heart attack in a box for you.
Oh, thanks very much, PJ. I was expecting sort of a gold logie, but... box of chocolate something, I guess.
That is a wrap Thanks for watching. Listen, in the comments, if you got, because this could just go on for hours, right? And if you're still watching, just leave a comment for any questions, and I'll get them to Bob, and we could do a part 2, or I could just answer them. And yeah, thanks for watching, and thanks for being here, Bob. High fives.
Fuck off.